All right. Looks like we've got a handful of people on the meeting. Gonna just wait a few minutes yet to get started here. All right, well, by my watch, we're at 1 o'clock, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jon Anderson. Today's Tech Connect session is Windows 11, Migrating to. In today's session, I'm going to talk about what has changed from Windows 10, cover some tips for customizing Windows 11, and talk about the process of migrating devices. So like I said, my name is Jon Anderson. I'm a senior systems consultant here at Now Micro. I've been doing consulting work for about 12 years now, and I primarily work with the Microsoft Endpoint Manager suite of tools. My main focus is helping our clients secure and manage both their identities and devices. You can find me on Twitter, and I also keep a blog where I occasionally post. As I mentioned, I work for Now Micro. We're a company based in the Twin Cities, and we do what would be best described as a device lifecycle company. We can help with purchasing, customizing, and deploying devices. Then we have resources like myself that can assist with management of devices. We also have our DICE asset tracking and management tool. And finally, we can help with recycling older devices. So if any of that sounds interesting, feel free to check us out. I also quickly wanted to highlight our DICE asset tracking and management tool. The base DICE product is great for asset management, while the DICE Complete tool offers more advanced features such as live monitoring of devices and geo-tracking. So in today's presentation, I'll be covering the information you need to know before moving devices to Windows 11. Things like the hardware requirements and the Windows servicing and upgrade process. After that, I'll talk about some of the new features and UI changes. I'll walk through some of the management changes for Windows 11 and talk about some of the features that were removed from Windows 10. Finally, I'll highlight some of the changes in the recently released 22H2 version of Windows 11. So let's jump right into the Windows 11 discussion. The questions I get most often when talking about Windows 11 are about the updated hardware requirements. Microsoft has put more strict hardware requirements on Windows 11 than were on Windows 10. I've listed some of the more notable requirements here. So Windows 11 will only support 64-bit processors, no more 32-bit edition. The processor also needs to have 2 cores and run at a gigahertz or faster. Officially supported processors are going to be those released in about the last 5 years. There are a few exceptions, but in general, you're going to need to have an Intel 8th gen processor or newer, or an AMD Ryzen 2000 series processor or newer. In my experience, the processor is the most common blocker to migrating devices to Windows 11. Many of the other system requirements can be met by installing firmware updates or modifying settings. However, if the processor is not supported, the only solution is to physically upgrade the processor. Every organization I've worked with since Windows 11 was announced has at least some devices that have unsupported processors. So these devices will need to be replaced with newer hardware in order to support Windows 11. There's also kind of a ticking clock element to this, as Windows 10 does reach end of support in about 3 years from now. So even if you don't plan to move to Windows 11 right away, I'd still recommend gathering this information about the processors in your devices, as it likely won't be a quick fix to update them to support Windows 11. So I'd recommend to start working on this now. Apart from the processor requirements, the requirements for memory and storage are pretty straightforward. 4 gigs of memory, 64 gigs of hard drive space. Some additional requirements. One of the most talked about changes with Windows 11 is the requirement for a TPM 2.0 security chip. If you're not familiar with TPM, it stands for Trusted Platform Module. A TPM is a physical chip usually attached to the motherboard of the system. The main purpose of the TPM is to provide hardware-based security. The TPM can generate and store cryptographic keys that are used to secure and authenticate the system. Some common examples where the TPM chip is used are things like BitLocker disk encryption or Windows Hello authentication. The reason this requirement has been talked about so much is that many consumer-grade hardware models in the past did not include a TPM chip. In some cases, these devices that don't have a physical TPM might have a virtual TPM, but if neither of those options exist, then the system won't support Windows 11. In the enterprise space, though, this requirement is less of a concern. The major hardware vendors, Dell, HP, Lenovo, Intel, etc., have been including physical TPM chips with their business or enterprise-grade systems for many years. However, one thing you will want to check is the version of the TPM chip. Many older systems may have a TPM chip that is configured to use the TPM 1.2 spec, whereas Windows 11 requires the TPM be configured to use the newer 2.0 spec. Often, this is a setting that can be changed in the BIOS or firmware of the system. Do note, however, that changing this setting may require reconfiguring operating systems that use the TPM, like BitLocker or Windows Hello. Windows 11 will also require the system firmware to be UEFI based and have secure boot enabled. So this means if you currently have Windows 10 devices running in legacy BIOS or compatibility mode, they will need to be converted to run in UEFI only mode, and you will need to enable secure boot. There's also a few new requirements for the display and graphics hardware in Windows 11. The display attached to the system needs to have a resolution of 720p or higher, and the physical size of the display also needs to be 9 inches diagonally. The graphics processor in the system needs to have a WDDM 2.0 driver and also needs to support DirectX 12 or newer. Also, it's not really a hardware requirement, but in order to perform an in-place upgrade from Windows 10 to Windows 11, the Windows 10 device needs to be running at least the 2004 feature update or newer. So let's see, that kind of covers the core hardware requirements of Windows 11. However, there are other feature-specific requirements. For example, to take advantage of the direct storage feature, the system needs to have an NVMe solid-state drive, and to best use Windows Hello, the system should have an infrared camera and fingerprint sensor. A full list of the core system requirements, as well as the expanded feature-specific requirements, can be found at the links below. I've also included a link to the Windows 11 compatibility check tool that Microsoft has released. If you're not sure if a system meets the Windows 11 hardware requirements, you can download and run the tool. It'll scan the target system and report back if there are any problems that would block Windows 11 from being installed. Finally, I want to note that you will probably find many blog posts and articles online talking about how to get Windows 11 to run on older, non-supported hardware. And it is possible to install Windows 11 on hardware that's not officially supported. However, doing so will be just that, not officially supported. This means that at any time, Microsoft could just stop releasing security updates for those systems or not allow a newer feature update to be applied. If you do have hardware that's not compatible with Windows 11, my recommendation would be to continue to use Windows 10 on those devices. Windows 10 will still be supported by Microsoft until 2025. This should give you plenty of time to upgrade those non-compatible devices to newer hardware that does support Windows 11.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt for a second. Your mic kind of keeps cutting out here and there.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. So sometimes we can hear you, and sometimes it just sounds like you're almost mumbling, but I think it's just the mic cutting out. So
yeah, let me move the mic a little bit closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, jump back in anytime if you notice that it's not connected still.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So we talked a lot about the hardware requirements with Windows 11. So one of the ways that you can easily figure out if your hardware is supported or not is with endpoint analytics. So this is a tool that is included in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager suite of tools. If you have A3 or E3 licensing, you can enroll devices with endpoint analytics. Probably the easiest way to enroll devices is using device upload or co-management if you're already using Configuration Manager. Once devices have enrolled, you can view data that's collected in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. And there's a whole ton of useful data collected by Endpoint Analytics, but specifically if you look at the Windows report and then the Work from Anywhere heading, you'll get a list of all the enrolled devices, and it'll tell you if they're compatible with Windows 11. And if they're not, it'll give you the reason why they're not, or reasons potentially why they're not. So along with the hardware requirements, I'm also frequently asked about the upgrade process from Windows 10 to Windows 11. And I'll get into my answer to that question, but before I talk the specifics of that process, I want to cover some of the basics about Windows updates with Windows 11. So the monthly update process for Windows 11 remains much the same as it was with Windows 10. There will be a monthly cumulative update released on the second Tuesday of the month that contains all the important patches for Windows 11. There are, however, a few behind-the-scenes changes with the cumulative updates. The size of the Windows cumulative updates has been reduced by up to 40%. This means a network bandwidth and storage savings for both consumers and enterprises. Once the update's been downloaded, there are some additional performance improvements. The update installation process should use less CPU resources and also consume less battery power. Both the size and performance improvements should lead to a more streamlined monthly update process. A few other quick notes: if you're using Configuration Manager or WSUS to deploy Windows updates, there's a new product category that you'll need to select before Windows 11 updates will synchronize. Also, Microsoft has increased the number of languages available to be serviced in Windows 11. If you can read more about the language pack changes and the other Windows update changes at the links in the bottom of this slide. So feature updates. Feature updates have gone through a few changes with the move to Windows 11. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the twice-a-year feature update process that was present with Windows 10. Well, that schedule has been changed in Windows 11. Instead of having the spring and fall update each year, Windows 11 will have just one yearly update that's released in the fall. You may have seen that the 28.2H2 feature update was actually just released last week. So that's the first feature update since the original Windows 11 release last fall. In addition to the modified feature update release schedule, Microsoft has committed to adding feature updates or features to Windows more regularly between the feature updates. So that means you wouldn't necessarily have to wait a full year to get new features in Windows. Microsoft may add smaller features throughout the year as part of just the monthly quality update process. The support for Windows, for the feature updates has also changed. So Windows 11 feature updates will be supported for 2 years on the Home and Pro editions and 3 years on the Enterprise and Education editions. There will also continue to be a long-term servicing channel release of Windows 11. However, the support window on the LTSC release has dropped from 10 years down to 5. The new 5-year support window starts with the LTSC 2021 release. The older releases, LTSC 2016 and 2019, will be grandfathered in and continue to have the 10-year support window. Also note, if you use the IoT Enterprise Edition of Windows, that will continue to have a 10-year support window. So now that we know about the feature update changes for Windows 11, the question is, how can we control the rollout of Windows 11? If you're using Configuration Manager or WSUS to control updates in your organization, then it should be business as usual. The Windows 11 feature update will only be available after you choose to download and deploy it to your devices. If you have devices that are using Windows Update for Business to get updates directly from Microsoft, then there are a few changes you should be aware of. Windows 11 will not automatically install on any Windows Update for Business managed device unless the target feature update version has been configured. The target feature update can be set using group policy. You'd configure the select the target feature update version setting, or through Intune by creating a feature update policy on the feature updates for Windows 10 and later page. If the setting does not show up in group policy, make sure the ADMX templates have been updated. And I've got a link to the latest Windows 11 group policy templates at the bottom of the slide. All right, so here's a look at how to configure the target feature update setting in group policy. In this example, you can see the product version is set to Windows 11 and the target version is set to 21H2. This means that any devices that get this policy would apply Windows 11 20H2. The second example here is the same as the first one, except that the product version has been changed to Windows 10. Devices with this policy applied would install the 21H2 update for Windows 10 and ignore the Windows 11 update. And then finally, in this last example, the product version is blank, but the target version is set to 21H2. In this case, Windows will default to set the product version field to whatever the currently installed operating system is. So if this policy were applied to a Windows 11 device, it would try to apply the 21H2 feature update for Windows 11. If the policy were applied to a Windows 10 device, it would try to apply the 21H2 feature update for Windows 10. And then the same setting can also be configured in Intune. So here's the process to create a target feature update policy and then select the target product and version from the list of feature updates to deploy. This policy would then be assigned to a group of devices. So the main takeaway here is if you're using Configuration Manager or WSUS, Windows 11 feature updates would be handled the same as Windows 10 feature updates. And when using Windows Update for Business, devices won't automatically update to Windows 11 unless you instruct them to do so. So now we've covered the requirements for installing Windows 11, let's look at some of the new features and UI changes. One of the most talked about changes with Windows 11 is the updated Start menu. It has a new look in Windows 11 compared to Windows 10, and also a new default position, which is centered at the bottom of the screen. However, there is an option to change the position back to bottom left if that's kind of what you're more comfortable with, although I do like it in the middle personally. The new Start menu is broken into 4 main sections. So at the top, you have the search bar, which can be used to find apps, files, settings. Below the search bar is the pinned section. So the pinned section shows multiple rows of pins. It used to be locked to 18 and actually is now changeable in 22H2, which I'll talk about a little bit later. You can scroll through the list of pins if they don't all show up on the first page. Up in the top right corner, there's the All Apps button, which will show a more traditional alphabetical listing of all the apps on the system. And then in the lower area of the Start menu is the Recommended section. So this will show recently accessed files and folders or recently installed applications, that type of thing. And then finally, at the very bottom of the Start menu is the User Profile button, which can be used to sign out or lock the system. And then the Power button, which can be used to shut down, restart, or sleep the system. The process of pinning and unpinning items from the start menu is the same as Windows 10. Just right-click on an item from all apps and then select Pin to start, or right-click on an existing pin and select Unpin from start. The order of the pins can be changed by just clicking and dragging. Initially, Windows 10 did not allow for creation of groups, but again, the 22H2 update changes that, which we'll touch on a little bit later. The default pins, you may notice them look different between the edition of Windows you install too. On the Pro and Home editions of Windows 11, you'll see more pins like Solitaire or advertisements even for third-party apps, whereas the Enterprise and Education editions are only going to have more business-related pins. Also, if Office is installed, it'll automatically pin a selection of the Office apps. And it's not just the look of the start menu that's changed in Windows 11. The process for customizing the start menu has also changed from like an enterprise level. So the first part of the customization process is similar to Windows 10. You log into a Windows 11 device, manually configure the start pins, and then after the pins are configured, from a PowerShell window, you can run the export start layout command. If you ever went through this process with Windows 10, then you may remember the export start layout command would output to an XML file. Well, with Windows 11, it now outputs to a JSON file. Once you have that JSON file, the next step is to set up a policy to apply it to other devices. Unfortunately, really the only supported way of doing this right now is through an MDM policy. There's not like a group policy to do a custom layout, but there is a workaround using registry keys, which I'll cover in a few minutes. So first, let's cover the supported method for deploying the custom start layout. From the Intune console, navigate to your device configuration profiles, create a new custom device configuration profile, and then enter a name for the custom setting. In this example, I used custom start pins for the name. In the OMA URI field, enter the path to the setting. For the data type, select string, and then finally in the value box, copy and paste the text from the JSON that you exported on the Windows 11 device earlier. After entering these settings, save the new configuration profile and assign it to devices. So the process for configuring the start menu with an MDM provider, pretty straightforward. However, doing the same thing using group policy or configuration manager is a bit more complicated. As I mentioned, there isn't currently a supported way to do this through group policy, and there isn't even a WMI option to invoke the MDM policy from the command line. So what can we do? I've included a link at the bottom of this slide to a post by Michael Niehaus where he talks about a workaround using the registry. Basically, the process is to apply the MDM profile to one device, export the registry keys that are created on the device, and then use a script or group policy to deploy those registry keys out to other devices. Hopefully Microsoft includes a better way to manage this without having to use the MDM provider in future update, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. And I actually haven't even looked into the 28.2H2 update too much yet, so I'm not 100% sure if there's a change there or not yet as well. So now we've looked at the start menu, let's take a look at the taskbar. So the taskbar has also been centered by default in Windows 11. It's no longer on the left side of the screen. Once again, though, there is an option to move it back to the left if that's what you prefer. Most of the default pins are the same as Windows 10. However, there are a couple of new items to point out. The first one is the widgets icon. Clicking this shortcut opens a widgets pane that prompts the user to sign into a Microsoft account. After signing in, the user has access to various widgets like news, weather, traffic, photos, to name a few. The other icon is chat. Clicking this icon opens the consumer version of Microsoft Teams. This version of Teams is intended for personal use and doesn't work with business or Azure Teams accounts. One other taskbar change is that right-clicking on the taskbar no longer gives a context menu with multiple options. Instead, there's only a single option just to open taskbar settings. However, if you right-click on the Start menu, you can still get a full context menu with many options. So here's a quick look at the widgets pane that I mentioned, and then also the chat pane. You'll probably want to end up, removing or hiding these. Taskbar here. So here's a couple of screenshots of just the new right-click menus for the taskbar. So you can see that right-clicking on the taskbar only gives that taskbar settings option, and then right-clicking on the Start menu provides a much larger list of options. If you are used to right-clicking on the taskbar to get a quick link to the task manager, that option is just changed to be on the start menu instead. Customizing the taskbar uses the same process as Windows 10. Configure an XML file with the taskbar pin settings, then deploy the XML file using Group Policy, Intune, or PowerShell. The process works to replace the File Explorer, Microsoft Edge, and Microsoft Store pins. I've included a screenshot of an example taskbar configuration XML. I've also included a link to the Microsoft Docs page, which contains more XML examples. But what if you also want to remove the widgets or chat pins? Those need to be done using other methods. So the widgets pin can be removed using a group policy or registry key. The group policy setting can be found under computer config, policies, admin templates, Windows components, and widgets. You just configure the allow widgets setting to be disabled. If you'd rather use the registry, you'll need to configure the registry setting listed down below there. And then the same thing can be done for the chat pin. So to remove the chat pin through your policy, go to the policy path listed there and configure the chat icon on the taskbar setting to enabled, and then set the state to disabled. Again, if you'd rather use the registry, you can configure it using the registry key listed here. Do note that for both of those registry settings, the value is HP current user. So that means it is a user specific setting. If you want to configure these settings during a task sequence or image deployment, you'll need to modify the settings in the default user profile registry hive. Again, I've also included a link at the bottom of the slide to the latest group policy ADMX templates for Windows 11. If you don't see these policy options, you probably just need to update your templates. So while the Start Menu taskbar may be the most obvious visual changes, there are a number of other smaller changes in Windows 11. One of those is the look of the right-click menus. The picture on the left shows what the new right-click menu design looks like, and then many of the common commands like copy, paste, move, delete have been converted to small buttons at the top of the menu. So this makes the menu more compact, but also some options are missing. So if you're unable to find an option in the new menu, there is a Show More Options selection, which will open up the old version of the right-click menu and should have whatever options were missing from the new one. Much like the right-click menus, Windows Explorer has also had some minor visual tweaks. The default icons for things like folders, hard drives have been updated. The menu at the top of the window has also been changed. The View drop-down menu has many of the options that used to be found in the View tab. You can find quick links to show file name extensions or hidden files here. It's probably the two most common ones I go to. The Action Center has also undergone a redesign in Windows 11. Clicking the volume or network icons in the system tray will open the new Action Center. The options in the Action Center depend on what type of capabilities the device has. The picture on the right is from a laptop, so there's options for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, screen brightness, etc. Clicking on the date time in the bottom right corner of the screen will open the calendar. This is also where the notifications will appear. And there's been some changes to this with the 22H2 update as well, which we'll also look at a little bit later. Another place where you'll notice significant changes is the Settings app. So this UI has been redesigned to make it easier to navigate and identify where settings may be located as compared to Windows 10. Many of the sub-pages are now easier to read and have less hidden settings, and it usually takes less clicks to get to them as well. Speaking of settings, the control panel is still hanging around in Windows 11. It hasn't changed much from the last version of Windows 10. The main difference is you'll notice there's updated icons, and other than that, it's pretty much the same. Microsoft's still kind of slowly but surely working on moving settings out of control panel into the more modern Settings app. Microsoft's continued to improve the dark mode in Windows 11. Selecting the dark theme in the settings now changes many of the apps system-wide to a dark mode. So this includes things like Explorer, Edge, even the desktop background. There are, however, still some apps that don't integrate with the system theme, but those are becoming more rare. Windows Snap feature is another area that's seen improvement in Windows 11. There's now a feature called Snap Layouts that appears when the mouse cursor is hovered over the Maximize button. Snap Layouts lets you select how you'd like to snap the selected window without having to drag it. Another new feature is called Snap Groups. When you have multiple windows snapped and the windows are minimized, it's possible to restore all the snapped windows at once. In the picture on the right, you can see I'm hovering over the Explorer icon, and it gives me the option to restore just the Explorer window, or I can restore both the Explorer window and the Notepad window at the same time using the group. To cover all the feature changes in Windows 11 would take longer than the scheduled time for today. So I've listed some of the other smaller feature updates here. Windows 11's got support for HDR video content. There's a new SMB compression. If turned on, Windows 11 device copying files to another Windows 11 or Server 2022 device will automatically compress files before and after the transfer. This means that less total data needs to be copied over the network. So this feature would use a little bit more CPU, but ideally save on network bandwidth. So it's kind of up to you to prioritize. There's also been some performance improvements to hybrid sleep. Windows 11 has a new default system font that's designed to look nicer on high resolution monitors. And finally, Windows is working on adding support for future technologies like Wi-Fi 6E and USB 4. So the changes in Windows 11 aren't just limited to the new feature or UI updates. There have also been a number of changes to the built-in apps. The Microsoft Store app has been completely redesigned. It has a new UI and new functionality. The old Microsoft Store in Windows 10 was only able to deploy modern universal Windows platform apps, whereas the new Microsoft Store is able to deploy all types of apps. So that includes those UWP apps, but also MSIX, MSI, and even EXEs. So this should hopefully help get more useful content in the store, which should get more people using the store. One thing to note about the new app installs, standard users will still be able to install apps like UWP or MSIX apps. But if you're trying to install an app out of the store that's an EXE or a traditional MSI, admin approval may be needed. Another new app in Windows 11 is the Terminal. Windows Terminal is a more modern command line interface. It's got tabs up at the top, which is nice. It also supports multiple different command interfaces. So for example, in like a single terminal window, you could have a PowerShell tab, a command prompt tab, and even like a Linux shell tab open. Terminal also replaces PowerShell as the default option in the start menu when you right-click on the start. I'd say the Terminal app is very customizable, and it should be seen as like the new default command line tool to use. You also may be familiar with the Snipping Tool from Windows 10. You also may have known that there was a second tool in Windows 10 called Snip and Sketch. Originally, the Snip and Sketch tool had been positioned to replace the Snipping Tool. However, with Windows 11, Microsoft kind of just took the best parts of both the old Snipping Tool and the Snip and Sketch tool and combined them into the new Snipping Tool app. Easy to use, I use it all the time. Power Automate for desktop, now being included with Windows by default. It's an app that's focused on process automation. It's designed to be used to automate like repetitive desktop tasks. It can be set up to input mouse clicks, keyboard strokes. This could lead to being able to do things like collect or enter data or copy files. You can read more about the product and how to use it at the link at the bottom of the slide. And then there's many other applications that have been updated or changed in Windows 11. I've called out some of the main ones, but before we move on, I wanted to highlight a few others quick. So the Calculator app has a new look and has actually been completely rewritten. It's posted on GitHub if you're interested in contributing. Other apps with minor UI updates are things like the Alarms and Clock app, the Paint app, Photos app. So I recommend just, once you install Windows, take a look through all the apps and you can kind of see what's changed. So next I want to talk about some of the changes that might interest the system admins. With the release of Windows 11, there are new MDM and GPO settings. The new settings mainly cover some of the new features like the start menu and the chat and widgets app, which we've talked about already. But also as part of the Windows 11 release and the Windows 10 21H2 update, Microsoft removed a bunch of the restrictions they had in place on many of the older ADMX policies that hadn't yet been migrated to have an official MDM setting. So it may now be possible to set some of these additional settings via an MDM provider. The UI for managing default application settings has been updated in Windows 11. And in the original release of Windows 11, the 21H2, this was a lot of people didn't like it very much because rather than being able to select an entire app and set that as the default for all associated file types, you had to do it by individual file type extensions. That's been changed in 22H2, which we'll look at a little bit later again. But otherwise, applying the default app settings is the same as on Windows 10. You would use DISM to export a custom app list to an XML, and then again use DISM to just import that XML to other devices that you're imaging with ConfigMan or through an Intune policy. Let's see, another Windows feature that's had a redesign with Windows 11 is the out-of-box experience. So when you start up Windows 11 device for the first time, you'll see that there's a new startup experience that looks like the image posted here. The blue background that you were used to seeing with Windows 10 is gone and replaced by kind of an off-white background. The layout of the pages has also been changed, so all the content is now kind of more on the right side of the screen, and the left side of the screen will just have some sort of image usually. I'm not sure if they're planning to use that space for something else, but for right now, it's a little bit more of a cramped UI experience. These out-of-box changes also affect Windows Autopilot. So the Windows Autopilot process will now match this new UI design, with one of the big improvements to Autopilot in Windows 11 is the introduction of the Debug menu that can be accessed by pressing the Control-Shift-D command shortcut. You can press that at any time during the Autopilot process, and it'll display a detailed status of the Autopilot process and show any failures that may occur. This is a big improvement from past solutions for troubleshooting Autopilot. Many of those solutions required installing or running scripts or having to manually dig through log files, which you may still need to do, but hopefully the debug menu can help identify some of the easier issues. One thing to note, though, is if you do have it open, the Autopilot process pauses in the background, so you don't want to just open the menu and try to wait for the process to finish. It'll just time out. So here's a quick example of the Autopilot user sign-in screen. Again, you can see all the content is on the right side of the screen. You sign in, or sign in with your username just the same as you would before. And here's a shot of the Autopilot debug menu. So this, again, much nicer experience for trying to walk an end user through troubleshooting. So in addition to all the new features and changes, there's also a number of features that have been removed in Windows 11. So the first thing on the list, which I'm happy to see go away, is Internet Explorer. With the move to Windows 11, you can finally stop having to support Internet Explorer, and really, you shouldn't be doing Internet Explorer anywhere anymore, as it was, or did hit end of life in June of this year. So hopefully that's gone entirely. Another removed feature is the dedicated tablet mode. Microsoft improved the base UI of the operating system to be much more tablet friendly, so there isn't really a reason to have the separate tablet mode anymore. Windows S mode is also gone in the business editions of Windows 10. It's still in the home edition. If you're not familiar, S mode was a feature that could be enabled to improve the security of the device by only allowing app installs from the Microsoft Store. And then finally, a number of previously default installed apps have been removed. So some of those include the 3D Viewer app, the UWP version of OneNote, Paint 3D, the consumer version of Skype, and the Wallet app. So let's see, Windows 11 22H2. This happens to be good timing for this presentation, as the 22H2 feature update for Windows 11 was just released last week. This is the first new feature update for Windows 11 since the initial release last year. This new update contains many new features. I'm going to run through some slides quick that list the changes, and then I'll switch over to a device running 22H2 and just kind of take a quick demonstration of some of them. So some of the most visible changes in 22H2 are to the Start menu. There's some new options available to adjust the amount of space taken up on the main screen by the pins and recommendations. So the settings now allow you to show 2, 3, or 4 lines of pins. And then as you increase the amount of pins shown, the number of recommendations decreases. Or reverse, you can reduce the number of pins to show more recommendations. Another new start menu feature is the ability to create folders in the pin section. So all you have to do is just click and drag a shortcut on top of another shortcut, and it'll automatically create a folder. To delete a folder, again, just click and drag shortcuts out of the folder, and once you've removed the last one, the folder will automatically disappear. Finally, there's a handful of new CSP policies supported for managing the start menu, and I've included a link to the supported policies at the bottom of the slide. Taskbar changes. So along with the start menu changes, there's also been a few changes to the taskbar with the 22H2 update. The drag and drop functionality continues here. So you can now drag and drop a file to a shortcut on the taskbar to have that application attempt to open the file. So for instance, you could drag a text document from the desktop over the Microsoft Word shortcut on the taskbar, and that file will open in Microsoft Word. You can also now drag and drop shortcuts from the start menu on the taskbar to quickly pin them. However, note that this only works dragging shortcuts from the All Apps list in the start menu. You can't drag and drop a shortcut from the Pins section to the taskbar. There's also some new settings available to control taskbar functionality. So there's now the option to enable or disable the flashing icons on the taskbar when an app's trying to get your attention. There's also a new privacy option to enable the display of recently searched items when hovering over the search icon. The volume of the system can now be controlled if you just hover your mouse over the little volume icon in the bottom right corner. You can use the scroll wheel to adjust the volume up and down. The Notification Center or Action Center has had some visual updates and has been integrated with the Focus Assist feature. So now there's a shortcut button directly in the Notification Center to enable or disable Do Not Disturb mode on the system. Windows Explorer has also seen some changes. So the first one you'll likely notice is the Quick Access page has been renamed to Home. This Home page is the default startup page for Explorer when it's launched, and it'll show you your pinned folders, your favorites, and your recently accessed files. As with previous versions of Windows, the default startup for Windows Explorer can be changed to something else like this PC. With the 22H2 update, though, they added an additional option where you could set the default startup page to OneDrive if you're using OneDrive on the system. And speaking of OneDrive, Windows Explorer now has a new shortcut button for OneDrive. So when you're in a OneDrive folder, up in the top right corner of the Explorer window, there'll be a shortcut that lets you access OneDrive settings, as well as like a quick link to open OneDrive in the web. There's also a new privacy option in the Explorer settings that allows you to control if locations and files from Office.com are displayed or not. There's a handy new keyboard shortcut. If you do Control-Shift-C while you have a file selected, it'll just quickly copy the path to that file. And then finally, there's been a bunch of small visual tweaks to the right-click context menus. They're still not perfect in my opinion. I find myself having to click the show more options still, but they're getting better at least. There's also been a few improvements to the snap layout feature with the 22H2 update. So you can now drag any window to the top of the screen and a menu will appear with options for the snap layouts. If you like keyboard shortcuts, you can use the Windows Z shortcut on any window to open the snap layout options, and then use one of the displayed number keys to select a layout. Task Manager's gotten some significant updates for the first time in quite a while with this release. You'll notice right away the overall interface of the Task Manager has been updated, and there's now more easily accessible settings and tabs from different pages in the Task Manager. There's also a new option to enable efficiency mode for some processes. So if a process supports this option, you'll be able to right-click on it and select the efficiency mode option, which basically just sets the process to a lower priority and tries to make it use less system resources. And then any process that's running in efficiency mode will have this little green leaf icon displayed next to it. And then there's been many minor changes to just the more modern settings app, more than I'd have time to go through here. I'd recommend just browsing through the settings app yourself, and you'll kind of notice some of the differences. One of the main things to note is that Microsoft's continuing to move from the control panel to the settings app. So in this release, there was a more significant amount of network settings and application settings moved from the control panel over to the settings app. Although it is still kind of confusing because a lot of them exist in both places. So it is what it is, though. Microsoft, as I mentioned before, too, has also made some welcome changes to the default application interface. So in the original release of Windows 11, like I said, you had to set default apps file type by file type. With the 22H2 release, there's once again an option to set the default for an app for all file types. Let's see, security changes. So in addition to a bunch of the visual changes in the 22H2 update, there's also been a bunch of the behind-the-scenes security improvements. So there's a new optional security feature called Smart App Control. This feature is built on top of the existing Windows Defender application control system. This feature can be used to automatically detect and block malicious or vulnerable applications and drivers. Do note, though, that this feature requires a fresh installation of Windows 11 to be enabled. So like an upgrade, this feature will show as not available. And the reason Microsoft gives for this is they don't want to enable the feature on a device that maybe already has compromised apps or drivers on it. So they want to start from a fresh slate. This feature, if you can enable it, can initially be run in evaluation mode or like an audit mode where it would tell you what it would change. And then after the initial audit period, you could turn it on in block mode. Credential Guard is a security feature that's been around for quite a while. The main change with 22H2 is that the Credential Guard is now enabled by default. 22H2 update also adds some enhanced protections for the local security authority process, as well as some more phishing protection options for Defender Smart Screen. And then the other big change is the addition of support for Microsoft's Pluton security processor. So Microsoft's been working on the Pluton security processor for a few years now. The idea is that they would use this new security processor to eventually replace TPM chips that are commonly found in devices. Over the past few years, as I'm sure you're aware, there's been a lot more attacks on TPM chips. And Microsoft's aiming with this solution to cut down on those attacks by having the security processor built directly into the CPU. However, as a result of this change, since the security processor is going to be on the CPU, your device needs to have a CPU that physically has the security chip built in. As of right now, the only compatible processors are the new AMD Ryzen 6000 processors and one of the Qualcomm series of processors. And then in addition to all these new features, there's a few more to look forward to in the near future. So the October cumulative update that comes out next month will contain a handful of additional features. The one I'm most excited about is tabbed browsing using the Windows File Explorer. So this feature has been a long time coming, and it'll be nice to finally have it in a production build of Windows. Some other features to look forward to are improvements to the Photos app, as well as there's going to be a new overflow menu for taskbar icons. And this is kind of like an example of the more continuous feature development that Microsoft's trying to do. So in the past, we'd likely have to wait another full feature update cycle to get some of these features added, whereas it's nice to see that they can just enable these features through a cumulative update right now, rather than having to, wait a whole nother cycle. So let's take a quick look here. This is a 22H2 machine that I just set up earlier. You can see some of the settings we talked about. So one of the things was the start menu. You can see I've got 3 rows of pins in here right now. If you go in the settings app and then personalization and start, there's now these options here. We can show more pins, more recommendations. So if I select more pins and go back here, you can see there's now 4 rows of pinned items. Or I could, drop it way down and have, a lot more recommendations at the bottom. So it's kind of however you prefer to view the start menu. You can also click and drag the icons, like I said, on top of each other to create a folder group of pins, or drag them back out if you want to get rid of the folder. So pretty straightforward with how that functions. The taskbar, like I said, there was a few new options there. So if you go to the taskbar behaviors, you can change the flashing icon settings or show the recent searches if you want to enable or disable that. As I mentioned, the snap layout changes. So if I take a window here and just drag it up to the top of the screen, you get a flyout for all the different snap options that are available. So pretty nice. Or again, if you do the keyboard shortcut, you can get it just to pop up right at the top here, and then select the snap icon that you want in the window. And while we got the folder open here, you can see Quick Access is now called Home, and it looks similar to how Quick Access looked before. But again, you can change the default to be this PC or OneDrive if you would like to have OneDrive be your startup folder. And then the OneDrive, like I said before, you can go into OneDrive and there's this nice little shortcut in the top right now that gives you like a quick look at your OneDrive as well as, you know, the settings and open it on the web. Security changes that I mentioned. So in Defender here, you can go to the app and browser control, and there's the new Smart App Control setting right at the top here. And then under the reputation-based settings, you've got Smart Screen with, again, additional options for phishing protection. Otherwise, yeah, let's see, you can hover over the volume and control it with the scroll wheel. The notification center looks a little bit different, like I said, more updated UI. And then up at the top, you've got the little shortcut for the Do Not Disturb, turn on or off. Like I said, the feature I'm most interested in is the tab Browsing and File Explorer, but that won't be available, like I said, until next month's cumulative update. So that's a quick look at the 22H2 features. So that's kind of all the features of, or the highlights of Windows 11. So then the question is, when should you upgrade? Windows 11 is a big update with many new features. However, it's not a huge change from an end user standpoint. Moving from Windows 10 to Windows 11 is much the same as moving from one Windows 10 feature update to another. It's a much smaller jump than past upgrades like XP to 7 or 7 to 10. The UI has had a bunch of tweaks, but overall it's going to be very familiar to end users. Also, many of the back-end systems management processes that are used for 10 will work the same for Windows 11. So there's not necessarily a ton of administrative effort required behind the scenes either. At a minimum, I'd recommend getting Windows 11 brought into your systems management tools, whether that's Configuration Manager, Intune, or something else. Start deploying a few devices with Windows 11. Test out your common apps and settings, see if there are any incompatibilities or issues. For unsupported hardware, again, Windows 10 is still supported until 2025, but that's only about 3 years from now. And I'm sure many of you are aware from past OS upgrades how quickly that end-of-life date can sneak up on you. So again, my recommendation, start piloting and deploying Windows 11 as soon as you're able to. That's the end of my prepared presentation on Windows 11. I can now take questions if you have any. Yeah.
It looks like we have no questions right now. We'll give it maybe a few more seconds since there's a delay.
Okay.
I'll let you know if we have any.
And again, if you think of a question that you have later on, just contact myself or Caitlin or any other contact you have at Now Micro, and they'll get your question passed along to me and get it answered for you.
Yeah, I suppose we can wrap it up now.
Okay.
Questions?
Well, again, yeah, if you think of questions later, feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, thanks for attending today's session, and hope everyone has a great day.